Okay, so we've now arrived on the British Salmson stand, and this is Martin from the club, and he's going to explain to us, A, the history of Salmson and British Salmson, and B, tell us something about some of these cars. I think this was probably the most interesting to you as Brooklands members, but maybe you could start by saying, what is British Salmson? I mean, to me, a Salmson is a French car.
Yes, so Salmson started as Salmson Engineering started as an aero engine manufacturer in the First World War.
Right.
They then went on to cars, and their first cars were actually GNs under license.
Oh, right. Okay, we've just been looking at a GN on the VSC.
Made in Paris.
Right.
And seriously annoyed GN because when they came to Brooklands, the French GNs were faster than the British GNs.
Okay.
But they then went on to make their own cycle cars, designed by a guy called Émile Petit. And this is an example of it. It's exactly the same model as the one that sits in the Brooklands Museum.
All right.
Different body style, but the same car underneath.
Right.
And they were highly successful at Brooklands. In 23, they bought the first of the twin cams, and they did extremely well. And that made the sales through their Chiswick subsidiary just flat out the door.
Right.
And there were some 2,000 Salmsons sold in England out of the Chiswick office.
Right. And you mentioned success at Brooklands. You said JCC 200?
200 in 23, I believe. Yes.
Right.
And some of the racers at that time in Brooklands were a family called the Martineaus, who were wealthy and had fingers in many other industries. A lot of the money came from sugar refining in the end of the 19th century. And they raced, as all the young, bright things did at Brooklands. And they got to know the French guys, including the MD of Salmson in London. And they said they started to sell Salmson aero engines out of their factory in Rains Park.
Right.
And then they took out a license on the design of the French Salmson of the 1930s. This is a 1925 Val 3 Grand Sport, which title-wise is exactly the same as the one in your museum.
Right.
It was sold in London registration number from new in 1925. It's right-hand drive, as they all were.
Right. A lot of foreign cars were
French sports cars were all right-hand drive.
I've never found the reason for that. Do you know the reason?
They believe it's to do with the fact that the French oval circuits at Montclair and Stieg and the one down south, Mirimas, that's the one. And they like to drive in one direction, and the drivers wanted to be next to the curb. Believed to be the world's first production twin overhead cam engine, all driven from the front of the crankshaft.
Right.
Three-way gear at the bottom that drives the magneto on one side, the dynamo on this side, and then vertically up to the camshaft.
Right.
And this made them supremely efficient for the size of engine. And they dominated the 1100cc racing classes,
right.
Brooklands, Montclair, and all the other places where racing was happening.
Yeah.
In the sort of mid-20s, really.
And this particular car, not a Brooklands history.
No Brooklands history. We have history. This is the car here at Chelsea.
Right.
So it was used in competition.
Sure.
Chelsea, Sutton Coldfield, places around here, in fact, for hill climbing. It's been obviously tidied up over the years, but this is its original body shape and wings. You see the butterfly wings are still the same. Still sitting on beaded edge tyres, which were the way they were then.
At the time,
3-speed box, just vicious cone clutch, which again, within the space of about 6 months, they went over to plate clutches. And it's great fun to drive. But I've only recently acquired it from its previous owner.
Yours, is it?
Yes, it's mine. Acquired it from its previous owner, who bought it in 1950 at the age of 17.
Right.
So it's only its second owner since 1950.
Oh, we have a lady at Brooklands who has a mother's pre-war 1938 Ford Prefect, which she calls Babs, and it's in immaculate condition.
So now we move on to the 1930s. Here we have a car. This is an S4C Salmson.
Right.
It's the chassis and layout and engine are of French design, but made in Rains Park. So we see still a twin overhead cam engine,
right?
But it's not the design of Emil Pettit that we saw in the vintage car. For a start, you see
London stamped.
yes,
He says
British Salmson, London.
London
That's
on
right.
it.
And strangely, they've turned it around. So now the cam drive is at the back.
Right.
Partly because they, as was done by many manufacturers at the time, moved over to Dynastarts, these huge things on the front of the crankshaft that are combined starter motors and dynamos. Horribly unreliable, but that was a thing
They
at the
thought
time.
it was going to be the big thing, yeah.
And then they're made by the British Salmson Aero Engines Limited, which was the company in Range Park. By that stage, they really weren't making aero engines at all. They were only making cars.
Yeah.
And they were bodied by various local coach builders.
Sure.
So this is a Ranelagh-bodied Tourer. And Ranelagh were pretty close to their neighbours. Ranelagh were in Merton.
Sorry?
Ranelagh were in Merton.
Okay, because it's all South London.
Yeah, all South London. The saloon that we see behind is a later model, but it's a Nunes-bodied car, and I believe Nunes were nearby as well.
Right.
So all the ancillary equipment is British. The bodies, you're seeing SUs, you're seeing Lucas Electrics, lights, Rudge wheels. So there's very little content of it that's truly French.
Right.
And they were highly regarded, and they sold quite well in the mid-30s. But these were still a very niche car because they were an unknown make, even then.
Yeah.
These were handmade cars. It put them up into the price range of Alvis and Lagonda.
Right.
And as today, you'd probably go for the brand that had the kudos in the public market.
Yeah.
So in total, from 1934 to 1938, they only made 300 cars.
Right.
In total.
Yeah.
But then they moved on to this. This is the same layout and design, but it's now gone up to 14 horsepower.
Right.
This is by 38. You've gone up to...
So this would be one of the later ones they made.
It looks visually the same engine, but it's a little bit bigger in capacity and so on. So it's a 14 horsepower engine. It gained a couple of hundred cc's. We're starting to see steel wheels instead of wires.
Right.
Independent front suspension and hydraulic brakes. So we're moving on in the way the industry was moving on. And we made open cars. We've chosen to bring a saloon to show the mix, but I mean, they still made this one as an open car as well.
Yeah. Again,
and then
picture of them racing up Brooklands.
This is one of the Martineau family racing one of the cycle cars at Brooklands, yes. Yeah. And if you look at your record books, you'll find Martineaus. There was four of them, I believe. I will, two in this family.
It's a name I will now be aware of.
Yes. And then in the mid to late 30s, they made this red one over here, which is the rarest of all.
Right.
It's an entirely British Salmson car, designed and built in Rains Park.
Right.
But this no longer has an engine or any similarities with anything that you would find in France. So it's a large 6-cylinder engine with the I think it's 2.5 litre 6. You could see some design similarities in the rocker cover, the cam covers, but really it was a new car. But
triple carburetor.
Yeah, triples. They only made 12 of these.
Wow.
Of which they made 4 body styles. There are 3 of each, and this is one of 8 remaining cars in the world. They were priced completely out of the market by then.
Right.
This cost the double of an SS Jaguar.
Right, yeah.
As the market had moved on enough that a hand-built car, unless you had the kudos of Bentley or Lagonda or whatever, people were not going to pay that money, and they really struggled to sell these. And the sales of these and the equivalent saloons at the time, the 14s, were going down. And it's strongly suspect that if there hadn't been a Second World War, they probably would have gone bust.
Right.
Because the sales were declining.
So what happened to British Salmson?
So what happened then is they stopped making cars in 1939, and they started making various mechanical parts for the war effort. They had a few cars in stock that were sold off after the war, but they never went back into production. Remnants of the company then moved to Scotland, and they made miscellaneous industrial machines, printing machines.
Right.
They made one of these little assisted push bike engines, a cycle aid it's called.
Right.
It was a little friction drive on the back wheel, 20cc oily thing, but that faded away. So that was the end of it, really. Whereas Salmson in France opened up again after the war and carried on making cars right up to 1957.
Right.
When they went bust and were subsumed into Renault.
Right.
Who were their neighbours in Billancourt.
Right.
But that's the whole history.
That's
really.
a potted history of Salmson and British
But
Salmson.
the reason that nobody here knows the brand is sheer numbers. I mean, 300 made. There's possibly as many as 70 to 80
Still
left.
alright.
But it's a good survival record against the numbers made, but they just didn't make them enough.
Yeah.
I mean, the French ones were made in volume, and you particularly in
I've
France.
seen them many times.
Yes.
Yeah.
But even the later ones, the
Yeah.
50s and 60s, 50s ones rather.
Yeah.
But no, that's it.
Well, thank you very much. That was very,
Thank you.
very interesting. Thank you for your time.